Let's talk about maybe the single most important development in human history since we figured out farming. The Industrial Revolution. It's not just some dusty chapter in a textbook. It's the reason our world looks the way it does right now.
But here's the thing that's always puzzled historians. Why there? Of all the places on Earth, why did this massive, world-changing explosion of technology and industry ignite on one tiny island? What was Great Britain's secret sauce?
Well, it turns out there wasn't just one secret. It was more like a perfect storm, a unique recipe of ingredients that all came together at the exact right time. So let's break down that recipe.
So, Britain had 4 key ingredients. First, they had an agricultural surplus. Thanks to new farming techniques, they could produce way more food with way fewer farmers. This created a whole new workforce just waiting for jobs. Second, they had cash. A really effective banking system and a bunch of entrepreneurs were just itching to invest in the next big thing. Third, you can't have an industrial revolution without the stuff to build it with. And Britain was basically sitting on huge piles of coal and iron. And finally, they had people to sell to. A massive colonial empire and a growing middle class at home meant there was a huge demand for new goods.
Okay, so the stage was set. All the ingredients were there. All it needed was a spark. And that spark came from a series of absolutely game-changing inventions that would first flip one industry, textiles, on its head. And then, well, the entire world.
For centuries, if you wanted to make cloth, it was a cottage industry. Literally, people made it in their cottages. But then inventions like the spinning jenny and the power loom just shattered that model. Suddenly, a single worker could do the job of dozens. It just didn't make sense to have these new, expensive machines in every little home. So instead, they brought the workers to the machines. And just like that, the modern factory was born.
The sheer scale of this change is, well, it's hard to wrap your head around. To feed these new factories, Britain's raw cotton imports just exploded. Think about it, they went from importing 2.5 million pounds in 1760 to 366 million pounds just 80 years later. That's not just growth, it was a tidal wave.
But while textiles were booming, one invention was about to pour gasoline on the fire. James Watt's improved steam engine was the breakthrough that everybody needed. See, before the steam engine, factories had to be built near rivers to get power. The steam engine cut that cord. Suddenly you could build a factory pretty much anywhere. It was the literal engine that would power the modern world.
And that engine did not stay put. Once they figured out how to put it on wheels, things got wild. The railroad was born, and the pace of change was just breathtaking. In a single generation, Britain went from using horse-drawn carts to having a 2,000-mile network of iron rails. Trains were hitting 50 miles per hour, a speed that would have sounded like pure science fiction just a few years earlier. This didn't just move goods, it shrunk the country.
So this new technology didn't just change what we made, it fundamentally changed how people lived. The very rhythm of daily life was about to be completely rewritten from scratch.
Think about work before the factory. It was tied to the seasons, a flurry of activity during the harvest, then maybe a slower period. You worked until the job was done. The factory threw all that out the window. Now your life was ruled by the clock and the constant, grinding pace of the machine. Workers had to show up for regular shifts and do the same repetitive tasks for 12, 14, even 16 hours a day. It was a whole new kind of discipline. And who was driving all this change? A new class of industrial entrepreneurs, guys like cotton manufacturer Jedediah Strutt. This quote of his really says it all. Getting of money is the main business of the life of men. These guys were ambitious, they were resourceful, and they saw making a profit as life's main goal. They were the architects of this new world.
You know, a fire this big was never going to stay in one place. The revolution that started in Britain quickly began to spread, first to Europe and America, then across the globe, creating a totally new world order, one defined by industrial power.
Okay, let this sink in for a second. At its absolute peak, Britain's dominance was total. This one small nation was producing as much manufactured goods as the rest of the world combined. It was, and this is no exaggeration, the workshop of the world. An economic powerhouse like nothing anyone had ever seen before.
But the revolution didn't look the same everywhere it went. Over in Europe and the United States, governments often stepped in to help fund and adopt British tech. The US in particular became a huge industrial power really fast. But for colonized nations, the story was tragically different. Take India, a country that had its own successful textile industry.
British policy was used to systematically tear down local production, turning it from a competitor into just a captive market for British goods. So the revolution for some meant deindustrialization for others.
So we've talked about the machines and the money, but the impact on society was just as huge. The revolution didn't just build factories, it completely remade society from the ground up.
This revolution kicked off one of the biggest migrations in human history. For basically all of our existence, humans were a rural species. The factory system changed that forever. People, drawn by the promise of work, just poured from the countryside into these booming industrial towns. By 1850, Britain crossed this incredible tipping point. For the first time ever, more of its population lived in cities than in the countryside.
But all of this progress came at a staggering human cost. For the new working class, life could be brutal. We're talking 12 to 16-hour workdays, 6 days a week, with zero job security. And child labor wasn't just some rare, unfortunate thing, it was a core part of the system. In fact, in 1830, 2/3 of the workers in the cotton industry were women and children, prized by factory owners because they were a cheap and easily managed workforce.
Eventually, society started to push back. Reformers, politicians, and the workers themselves began to fight for better conditions. It was a long, hard struggle, but you start to see these landmark acts get passed. These were the first real steps toward government stepping in to regulate industry and protect its most vulnerable workers from the worst abuses. In the end, the Industrial Revolution created the world we all live in, from our cities and our jobs to the very idea of a 9-to-5 workday. It's a story of incredible innovation and brutal exploitation, of unimaginable progress and immense suffering. And it leaves us with a really important question for our own time of rapid technological change. As we build the next revolution, what kind of world will we choose to create?